Hello everyone, and welcome to Module 3, Plugging Right Along. This week we are talking about attending skills and empathy, and I just want to provide a little bit of an overview of what we mean when we are talking about listening and attending skills in counselor terminology, right? So it's one thing for us to know that we're good listeners. People come to us and talk and we can listen, right? But it's another thing to think about listening and attending behaviors in the broader scope of things and in terms of fostering that therapeutic alliance, right? And so you'll find in chapter 3, and I know we skipped chapter 2, don't worry, we will come back to it at a later date, but in chapter 3 you're kind of introduced to some of the common terms you're going to continue to hear throughout this program: working alliance, attending behavior, nonverbals. You're kind of introduced to people like Carl Rogers, who is the founder of a massive movement in counseling and the godfather, if you will, of person-centered counseling, which solely focuses on empathetic responses to our clients. And so we're kind of really getting into the actual counseling part of all of this. There's talk about how our brain senses the reactions of clients or people across the table from us, and they can sense our reactions too, and we can mimic those or mirror those reactions, those behaviors, those verbal cues. And then towards the end of the text chapter, you're going to be introduced to a narrative version of the film that I hope everybody can access. Sometimes they are inaccessible for whatever reason, the videos that I post through the library's website, but Alan Ivey actually provides some film for us that we're able to watch. And so in the latter part of the chapter, where he's talking about his interactions, the positive and the negative interactions that he have with his client from Puerto Rico, we're actually going to be able to watch that this week, a short version of that, and then reflect on it for our discussion post. So kind of going back to listening and the couple of slides that I have, I know I kept it kind of short and sweet. I tend to do that with the modules until we at least get in the on-campus time together. But when we're thinking about attending behavior, listening is at the top of the list. And listening as a counselor takes practice, because it's not just simply listening as we would to friends, coworkers, people that we don't necessarily care about, but listening is not just a matter of hearing the words that are coming from the client, right? So it's, in addition to that, it's vocal tracking. So understanding that if our client comes in and is usually very soft-spoken, speaks kind of slower, maybe takes their time, if they come into us the next time and they are speaking very quickly in fragmented sentences, that's different. That's not, a typical behavior of our client. We're also using visual cues. Is our client closed off? Are they crossing their arms all the time? And that's not typical behavior for them. Are they distracted? What is their body language like? What are their facial expressions? And all of this is what we are looking at our client and observing, but we're also having to be aware of the visual cues we're giving off, our facial expressions, our body language, our tone of voice, our inflection, the rate of speed in which we're speaking, whether or not we're nodding our head, whether or not we are saying, okay, I see, I understand. If we are even our positioning. So we never want to be sitting too close to the client. Although if you will ever look at Carl Rogers' videos, which you will if you have me in 606, he sits real close to his clients in a way that would make me personally uncomfortable. But he liked to be a little bit closer in proximity to his clients. So, to each their own, I suppose. And a lot of it has to do with cultural norms as well. And you'll learn much more about that in your cultural issues class. But some cultures are more apt to making eye contact versus others. And so it just depends on the person. It depends on the client. But we have to make sure that we are displaying these attending behaviors appropriately to our clients in order to facilitate the development of that working alliance. So we're working together as a team, ourselves as the counselor, our client as the client, working together for the betterment of the client, right? Other things to keep in mind when we're listening, it's not, again, not just a matter of hearing the client, but one thing that we kind of get into the habit of, and it's part, I think, of the society in which we live, is forming responses to people as they're speaking to us. And it can be difficult, and I kind of liken it to being in a almost meditative state, right? So if we're meditating, we are clearing our mind of thoughts, we are being present and being aware of how our bodies are reacting, if you will, just clearing our minds, right? So if we're in a counseling session, we are in essence doing the same thing and allowing ourselves to completely listen to the story that our clients are telling us. And within that space, within that time that we're allowing our clients to share information with us, we aren't automatically developing a response before they have finished whatever their thought is, whatever their story is, whatever, behavior it is that they're describing to us. And that's difficult. It's tricky. And it's something that you can start practicing now. And I encourage you to do that. Start practicing with people around you. Just letting yourself be and letting your mind clear for a moment whenever somebody is speaking with you. Because what will happen is that when you don't do that, we won't get the end of the story from the person that's speaking with us or to us, because we've already started developing our own response. And when we're developing our own response, as much as we may think we can multitask, our brain can't exactly do all of that. And so when we're developing our own response, then we've checked out. That we are maybe hearing sounds come out of our client's mouth, but we're not actually able to process what that information is. So again, it's a skill that comes with time, and you have to be easy on yourselves when you're trying to develop that skill, and it's one that is easily lost as well. And so it's something that you have to continuously practice and keep on track with in order to make sure that you're really providing your clients with the best service that you can, right? And so part of what our response would be then, and we'll learn about this in the upcoming weeks as we kind of build on the pyramid, are taking the most important parts of our client's story and effectively summarizing them, rephrasing them, paraphrasing them, and reflecting them back to our clients. So, but that's for another day. Just think about the listening part of it now. Other things to think about, clients can tell when you check out. Totally can tell when you check out. They will also call you on it. They'll say, are you listening to me? So, for that reason, and I mentioned it in last week's lecture as well, it's important to kind of minimize the distractions that you might have in your office, wherever you're meeting a client, to the best of your abilities, of course. And so even in terms of positioning yourself within the room, it's always important to make sure that you have an easy exit. That's just kind of like a counselor 101 thing. Make sure that you're not backed into a corner or backed into a wall for protective reasons. So you want to make sure you can exit the building or the room if you needed to. But if you are facing a window of a busy street where you're at street level and people are constantly walking by you, that could be a distraction. And when your eyes move away from the client, that could be that signal to them, a nonverbal behavior that we are not actively listening and we're not listening to the story they're telling. We're not paying attention and we don't care, right? And so minimizing distractions can be really beneficial for so many reasons. It can even occur if you're doing some type of like telemental health counseling. If you are using any kind of technology like Zoom, you never want to use FaceTime, never want to use Skype. They're not secure, but there are other software applications that you can use to video chat with clients. So minimizing distractions even within your home office or whatever environment you're doing that in can be very beneficial. Can't always control what's happening on the other side of it. Same goes if you're doing telephonic counseling. I've been on calls with clients where birds have been chirping and dogs have been barking and everything happens. And so it makes it very difficult to listen when that occurs. But it really helps you sharpen those skills, those attending behaviors and skills. So one thing that Ivy talks about, and I included the nonverbal communication, article for you all to look at, even though it's really pretty old from 1972, but it's worthwhile to look at, because in terms of communication skills, you just want to kind of remember the three V's plus B, right? So make sure visuals and eye contact, you're always aware of where you're looking, and maintaining appropriate eye contact with the client, mirroring a lot of the times what they might be reflecting to us, making sure that our tone is appropriate, that we're conveying empathy in our voice, that we are not speaking too quickly or speaking over top of our clients. Of course, verbal or the language that we're using, the communication, that also can be something that we kind of, while we're listening and attending to our client, we can mirror what they're saying to us. If I were working with a client that was very spiritual and religious, I probably would not cuss in front of them, right? But if a client was saying stronger language to me and I felt comfortable repeating that appropriately, I might do the same, right? So, and body language is very important as well. Little things. So if you are crossing your arms, you might seem standoffish. That's a hard one for me. I cross my arms all the time. I've always done it. Typically, I'm just freezing cold, and so I just want to be warm. I also like to tuck my legs under myself, when I'm sitting, and odd little behaviors like that. That if I'm with a client with another person, I have to make sure that I'm more aware of my body language. Leaning in, even when you lean into a conversation, in some cases it might be inappropriate if you're leaning and getting very close to your client. I always think of the Seinfeld Close Talker episode, if you're familiar with Seinfeld, and how that can be very uncomfortable, or it can seem confrontational to some as well, if you're leaning forward and kind of encroaching in their personal space. So just to kind of wrap up, and I'm going to do this, I think I do it pretty much every week within the modules. I want to make sure that we're covering how some of these basic micro skills need to be applied or should be considered when you're working with people with disabilities. Now, I say people with disabilities in the broadest terms, right? So that could be anybody, and I use the Americans with Disabilities Act definition as my go-to, but any person with any kind of physical or mental impairment that limits any kind of life activity, so to the broadest extent. But I do like to kind of break it down to some of the more maybe common disability categories. And even if you're going into straight up clinical mental health counseling, that odds are you're still going to be working with a client that may have some type of disability or condition that might be considered a disability. So it's always important to be aware of these things. So in terms of eye contact, if somebody has a vision impairment or is blind, if somebody is an older adult that you're seeing and has age-related vision loss, if somebody has diabetic neuropathy, anything, so any kind of visual impairment, you might need to adjust your physical environment a little bit. Lighting may need to be changed. It's always good to, again, little tips here, but it's good to keep like a lamp in your office in case somebody is very bothered by overhead lighting. A lot of people, overhead lighting tends to cause migraines, headaches, and I assure you, if you're sitting there with somebody and all of a sudden a migraine hits, you're probably not going to get much done in terms of counseling that day. So little things like that can make a big difference. And it also makes an office or an office space a little bit more warm and inviting, right? To have kind of that soft lighting. If somebody is for any kind of printed materials that you might have, so if somebody does have a vision impairment and needs accessible materials, you may or may not work for an agency that is required to comply with certain standards under the Americans with Disability Act, but we're counselors, we should be helping people, and that's my kind of personal stance on it. Even if you don't, if you're not having to comply with a federal law that helps people with disabilities, I mean, why would we not just be trying to assist people anyway? But make sure that you have potentially alternative options available if somebody can't read a brochure, can't read an intake form. Make sure that your website is being designed so that it could be accessible with a screen magnification software application, screen reading. If somebody has a service animal, that's also something to be aware of, kind of those appropriate interactions with service animals. Service animals are working when their vests are on, so they're not pets, we're not petting them, we're not paying attention to them. For dog lovers such as myself, it is very difficult to do that. but it is something that we have to do. For individuals that have hearing impairments, or if somebody is deaf and using an interpreter service, you may need to do a lot of things. One, make sure you know how to find an interpreter in your community if you ever need to rely on that, or go to that, not rely on it, but make sure you know how to find interpreter services. If you're working with somebody that does use an interpreter, make sure that you're making eye contact with the client still, and not looking at the interpreter the entire time. That's being very dismissive of the person that is there to see you personally. You may need to slow down your rate of speech. That one's tricky for me. I tend to be a fast talker, and so you might have to slow that down. If somebody's using assistive technology, again, you may have to just kind of adjust how you're speaking, adjust your tone. Body language, again, this one I think is big for individuals that have experienced trauma or have, any kind of, I'm trying to think of any, and yeah, I'm just going to leave it at trauma, right? Because now I'm drawing a blank at 8 o'clock at night. But make sure you're maintaining a comfortable distance from a client. Make sure that even office spaces that are small, you can kind of arrange furniture in a certain way so that you've got some space. If you have extra space, it's always good to make sure that you have the space is accommodating for anybody that might use a mobility device. That's a wheelchair, a scooter, a walker. Again, it's not just that we're speaking of people that have kind of the more traditional disabilities, but if you're seeing anybody that's of older age, it may be that they need some type of mobility device to access the facility. And body language, other little things. Not everybody likes to shake hands. Certainly you shouldn't be giving hugs. That's not a great thing to do for ethical reasons. But those are all little things just kind of to watch out when you're working with a client. Make sure to just, again, mirror their actions and behaviors. If they put their hand out to shake your hand, shake their hand. If they don't, it's plenty fine just to say hello. And verbal tracking. So make sure that, and again, this all wraps into and ties into attending behavior and watching our clients' reaction to the things that we're saying. If we veer off from a goal that was set for that counseling session, or not for the whole process as a whole, we can tell if the client's really not into it, right? They might then become distracted easily and look at other things, or just be dismissive of the questions that we're asking. So redirecting a client can certainly be okay. Ivy talks about it in the text. I shouldn't say Ivy. There's two Ivies and Folloquet, but it may be necessary to redirect a client. You may have a client that just talks and talks and talks and talks, and you can't figure out a place to get a word in edgewise, and so you have to kind of practice ways to interject and interrupt in an appropriate way. Silence is perfectly okay. So this is part of that active listening training that you're going to start doing with yourself, right? So when you're talking with somebody, make sure to, again, let them complete their thoughts entirely, and then pause. Take a second. Silence. It's great. It's lovely, but it's uncomfortable, especially when you're at this kind of very new stage. So that can always be helpful, because it allows everybody a moment to just kind of reflect, pause, and then during that moment of silence, that's when your brain is kind of in overdrive, figuring out what you're going to say next. Again, it's all skills. You will build them, I assure you, and we're going to work on them ad nauseum for the next year, right? And another thing that we shouldn't have to say, but sometimes do, you never want to be talking more than your client. You never want to be oversharing information from both an ethical standpoint and a way to protect yourself. You don't want to be, giving all this personal information and details about yourself, because then the counseling session becomes about you, and it's not about you. I hate to be so blunt about that, but the counseling session is not about you. So make sure that you're allowing your client the space to talk, and you're not being overbearing within that conversation. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys to the discussion board. Again, there's a couple different other references on within this module, a nice condensed 3-page top 10 basic counseling skills that talk about attending behavior, listening, and also about all the other skills that you're going to be learning about throughout the semester. semester. So I thought it would be useful to just kind of place it here. The basic attending skills, I want you to watch until the 13-minute mark. It's a very long video. This is the thing about online education. If we were in a classroom setting, I'd probably force you, for a lack of a better term, I'd force you to watch a lot more of this video because I do think it's beneficial. It is Alan Ivy talking, and I think he does a really good job at being a really bad counselor, and then kind of on the other side of it, showing you what a well-trained counselor in a session should look like. So please feel free, of course, to watch as much of it, all of it as you like. I think it's useful. But for the purposes of the discussion, really till the 13-minute mark, so you get to see really the both sides of him in action and portraying a counselor with his client. And then that's about it. So I got a couple prompt questions for you guys within the discussion board. Same as usual, I'll get in there. You might notice that I'm not posting on everybody's page. I've kind of done that the past 2 weeks just because we're new to all of this, and I want to make sure that you guys know that I'm in there and reading these discussion posts and participating and engaging with you. But I won't always be posting on everybody's threads, and that's okay. It doesn't mean anything necessarily, especially the ones that are flowing nicely and you guys have a nice discussion going and it may come to a natural conclusion. You might not see me in those. So everybody's doing great so far. Keep it up, and if you have any questions, as always, please let me know.